Welcome everyone to Overcome Podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to talk with Rick Mader, a longtime runner and Emmy-nominated TV executive living in Los Angeles. Rick is also the author of the book 6 Hours Running for My Life in the Grand Canyon. And he has an amazing story to share with us about overcoming adversity and achieving goals. Rick, welcome to Overcome Podcast.
Thank you, Yuri. Happy to be here.
Hey Rick, I got your book. Very cool. Really enjoy reading, but I will play like I have no idea about your story because that's what we are here to talk about. So, in your book, 6 Hours Running for My Life in the Grand Canyon, you tell your story and how you defy the odds to run the Grand Canyon on your 60s with your cardiac condition. So, before we talk about the journey itself, tell us a little bit more about the heart attack, which I believe it happens when you were around 59, something like that. Is that correct?
Correct. I was on a regular 3 mile run in Los Angeles, and my running had been a little in the toilet. I'd had to like take walking breaks and stuff. I knew something was going on, and I was determined to figure it out on this run. And then suddenly, a half mile into the run, my body felt like it was shutting down, like a car that had run out of gas. Um, and it just felt like it was dangerous to even try to keep running. And I stopped, and I felt a weird sensation in my chest, and I just knew immediately it was my heart. Um, so I was totally shocked, and I actually walked the rest of my workout, um, just kind of on automatic pilot,
Mm-hmm.
um, and scheduled an appointment with my doctor, who poo-pooed it because he thought I'm a runner, I'm in shape. And then he did an EKG, and his face went white. I thought I was going to have to argue with him. I had something serious wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I went back in his office, and he was just like, "said, what is the sheet?" And he showed me the EKG compared with like a year ago, and it was just very screwed up. And he got me in touch with the cardiologist immediately. And so after a couple of days, I went in and was either going to be open heart surgery or angioplasty, depending on whether they could fix the occlusion, which was my LAD, which is the artery known as the Widowmaker. So it carries 50% of your blood. It's the most dangerous artery to have a problem with. Um, so long story short, my cardiologist told me the only reason I didn't suffer a major fatal heart attack was because of distance running. And he showed me on a CT scan that when you do distance running or any distance sport, swimming, cycling, um, your body builds up additional blood capacity. So around the occlusion, which was complete, which should have been fatal, a fatal massive heart attack, there were all these little ancillary blood vessels, and they got just enough blood around the occlusion for me to survive. And so I had the angioplasty, and I have a chapter on that called "Your Angioplasty Would Be Televised," which is a little bit of an in-joke since I work in television. But um, the the they give you minimal anesthesia, and you actually can stay awake, if you choose. And I wanted to know the results as soon as possible. So I made sure to stay awake. And there were these two monitors that the two cardiologists were working off, and I could see them kind of like roto-rooter the
Mm-hmm.
occlusion. And then I could see it breaking up, and it was like, thank God. And I had young kids at the time, married. So I relaxed, and the cardiologist confirmed that, yeah, it's working. We're going to put the stents in. I had 3 stents put in, and you're not going to need open heart surgery, which of course is way more risky, and it takes weeks to recover from.
Yeah, in the book you said I pride myself of my health. So I'm pretty sure that you were very surprised about that. Did you ever got like an accurate diagnostic of why this happened in the first place?
Yeah, well, I knew, and when I talked to the cardiologist about medical history, my mother had pulmonary issues. So I'm a member of an organization called Cardiac Athletes, and it's international. It's based in Australia, but it's also the UK, New Zealand, Canada, and the US. And I only joined that in the last couple of years, and but the point is that everybody there had hereditary heart conditions, cardiac issues. So everybody's an athlete. Everybody's just some of them are almost world class. I mean, they're serious athletes, and some of them are only in their 30s and 40s. But what we have in common is we all inherited cardiac issues, no matter healthy diets, no matter exercise. Um, and it's a support group, which is because we've all chosen to go back to our sport, often against the advice of the medical community.
But did you join this organization after the heart attack or before?
Oh, after it's been recent. I just thought I'd give them a shout out because if there's anybody listening who has cardiac issues and who's a runner or a cyclist, or it's a really good organization to check out because it's all people in the same boat. Because when you get hit with something hereditary and you're eating healthy and you're exercising and you're not overweight and you're not a smoker, it really can come out of the blue.
But were you aware about your hereditary conditions before you had that problem? In other words, were you expecting that at some point this is gonna hit you?
No, and truthfully, about 6 months before the heart attack, I was going upstairs at our house and suddenly felt kind of faint. And and this I think is unfortunately what a lot of people do. And I said, I don't want to know what that was. When in fact, if that happens, it's just the opposite. You need to find out what that was. And I should have gone into a doctor, had a treadmill test, and because if you wait too late, you can have a fatal heart attack.
But it is like a normal type of faint. Can you just think, well, I'm just tired or I didn't recover well? How do you determine if it is something that needs to be addressed or if it's just because you are exhausted?
Well, I knew I wasn't exhausted. I mean, I think unless you're dehydrated or something, where it makes sense that you would feel faint. If there isn't anything like that going on and you just suddenly feel faint out of the blue, doing some mild exercise going upstairs, that's a potential warning sign.
And that was
You know,
6 months before you had the heart attack.
yes, because the LID was already getting included, and then the cardiologist thought that maybe a piece broke off right before that run and finished the job and completely occluded the artery. It went from maybe 70% to 100%
And you
occlusion.
were always a runner, even before that event. Were you running for how many years now?
I started in high school. I was a miler and ran cross country, and then I lettered in cross country in college. But then I stopped running for years, and I went back for a couple of years in the 1980s. Um, and I had some, I was doing 5Ks and 10Ks and pretty serious about it. Um, you know, I think my story is a much more of an average or typical runner. My best 5K um, was 18 minutes and change, which is respectable, but it's not, it's not world class. Um, but then I stopped again. I actually overtrained, and I ran a marathon, but I overtrained for it, and it just took all the fun out of it. If you're not using a coach or even paying attention to like a good book like one of Jeff Galloway's books, and you go from running a few miles to running 60 or 70 miles a week, it's not a smart idea. So I wound up stopping again until 1994, and I decided to go back to it, and then I haven't stopped since then.
Awesome.
And it's a good thing I went back because it was if I wasn't a runner, I wouldn't have had the ancillary vessels. I wouldn't have, if I was just, sedentary, I still would have had the same medical thing happen, only it would have been fatal. So I would have
Yes.
died at 59.
Yeah. So running saved your life, basically.
Yes, it did.
And now you had this, you went through this, and then came the idea about the Grand Canyon. Is that what happened? What?
Well, that was some years later. After I had the angioplasty, I actually went back to even racing. And I won my age group in like a 5K. Um, but then, at some point, racing, your performance it drops as you get older. Plus, I had lasting damage. The heart attack took out maybe 10% of my heart muscle, and there was also an additional artery, the circumflex artery, that was blocked, but wasn't judged worth, going in and fixing. So I had lost a bunch of my capacity. And what happened was, I have a cousin who goes to the Grand Canyon every year with friends and hikes it, and he invited me along, and I went. And partway through the hike, I just started thinking this would be really cool to run. And you're not faced with trying to replicate a time from when you were younger. Like I ran when I was 64, so you're not, because if you run a marathon or 10K or whatever, at some point, like I said, your times are going to get slower. And I had additional cardiac, damage, um, and that's what gave me the idea. And then I was going to run it immediately, but I had my annual treadmill test, partly because my wife was not crazy about me running the Grand Canyon. Um, and and I was surprised to discover I was back to 80% occluded in the Widowmaker. So I had to have another angioplasty,
Oh, wow.
forced, and I had to delay for a year running the Grand Canyon. But then I trained up and I ran it the following year.
Did your doctor encourage you to keep running, or he asked you to slow down and take it easy?
Well, the original cardiologist told me it was time to hang up my running shoes, and that's in the book. And my response was to get a second opinion, and I found a cardiologist who worked more with athletes and just runners, and he was an avid cyclist. So the deal we struck was basically if I didn't run more than 10 miles and and was careful, etc. First I had to start with exercise walking, but then I went back to running pretty quickly. So he was supportive. If he was always a little concerned, but I wasn't the only patient he had who went back to running. So that was good. But I know from cardiac athletes, especially in countries with managed healthcare,
Hmm.
like England, I guess Canada, um, people get stuck with someone who may be adamantly saying, "Yeah, you got to stop running," and it's hard to work the system and get another cardiologist advice. But
Yeah, it's
I,
hard to get a second opinion about that, right?
yeah, but I strongly encourage people to do that. I think one thing about the book is one one reason I wrote it is it's directed to cardiac patients, and there's something like 28 million in the United States, and that your life doesn't have to come to a stop, and exercise doesn't have to come to a stop. I think just the opposite. I mean, obviously in consultation with a doctor and
Right.
being careful how you do it, but especially if you were already exercising, and if you weren't,
Hmm.
start. Like just with exercise walking, or um, I mentioned Jeff Galloway. I went to a training camp of his back in the '90s, and he's the most prolific American running author. He was a former 10,000 meter champion. He was on the U.S. Olympic team, um, and he adopted the walk and run method. There's been a real change in exercise from when I was coming up in cross country in college. The old no pain, no gain thing.
Hmm.
That's really old thinking. And so if someone listening is interested in going back to exercising, pick up a Galloway book. His newest one is called Running Running Until 100, because we've all gotten older, including Jeff.
Yeah, yeah.
But so he's a good coach, and it's the way to do it now is you go out and you do some walking, jog until as long as it's comfortable, go back to walking, jog some, and eventually you can build up. And this particularly applies to You know, people over 50 or over 60 or over 70.
So when you were training for the Grand Canyon, did you do any special type of training since you had that condition, or were you doing things that you've done all the time when you were preparing for racing or just long run?
I did what I always did. I'm in Los Angeles, and there's a mountain called Mount Wilson here. It's actually where all the TV towers are. And from the bottom of Mount Wilson to the top is 5,000 feet, which is about what it is from the south rim of the Grand Canyon to the River Gorge. So I did some work on Mount Wilson, and I like to run hills anyway. So I just my training focuses on a long run on Sunday. So you don't run as far when you get older. So, but I run a couple times during the week, and then the Sunday long run is what keeps you able to run your age group in races and stuff.
Hmm.
You know, I go out and do 7 to 12 miles on Sunday. So that's the real key to, and that'll be in Galloway's running books. All that's really the standard focus now, especially if you're not an elite athlete. It's
And
just
as
more.
far as time, how long it takes for you to run that much?
Well, it's not about the time. It's more about because eventually I stopped tracking mileage in terms of pace. Um, I went through a change where, though I did have a time goal for the Grand Canyon, so I was more focused on it back then. Um, but I mean, I was running a marathon. I was doing 8-minute miles back in the '80s, running a marathon. But it's
No,
you
yeah,
slow
yeah.
down.
I'm talking about as you were leading up to the Grand Canyon journey. Were you training like 3 times a week, 1 hour a day? That's what I'm trying to find out. Or how was the regimen as far as time that you were pushing to get ready?
Then it would be more like 45-minute runs 2 or 3 times a week, and then um, like a 2-hour run on Sunday,
Hmm.
2.5 hours. Like I said, it's more about the time, the amount of time that you're doing it rather than getting locked into a certain distance. Um, and obviously the Grand Canyon, the ascent is incredibly tough. So you need to do hill work
Yep.
or mountain work. Like I said, I happen to really enjoy. I love trail running, and it's easy for me to do in Los Angeles. There's canyons, and you can do trail running and go up to Mulholland or up Mount Wilson, because the Grand Canyon is kind of the ultimate trail run.
It's when you did the Grand Canyon, what season was it? Was spring, fall?
It was early June, and
Oh, so it
actually,
was summer.
well, it's the beginning of summer, and you raised a really good point. I go into all that in the book, um, because there are dangers associated with running the Grand Canyon. Um, though most people that die in the Grand Canyon, and sadly there's several people every year, it's more from falls. You
Oh,
know,
wow.
they're clowning around, by the edge, or they're on Point. Tragically, a woman just died. She's only in her 30s, and she fell from Point. That's the first. It's in the book. It's the first place where you can get a really good vista of the canyon, but it's very small. And I won't go onto it unless there's no other people on it. And she literally got bumped by somebody and fell to her death.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. Wow.
and and so I think we've got enough time to go into a little bit of this, but I do tell the story of Margaret Bradley, um, which points out how important planning is. And then we just remind me we need to do the time of year. But Margaret Bradley was a young potential Olympic marathoner, and in the earlier 2000s, her picture was actually at the top of the Bright Angel Trailhead, and it said, could you run the Boston Marathon? It was her running the Boston Marathon, and then it had the dates of her life,
Hmm.
birth and death, and she and a guy went down the Grandview Trail, which is a little east of where I ran, and thought they were doing a 16-mile run, And like I said, she was an elite athlete, and they had a couple quarts of water with them, but it actually they misjudged the distance, and it was actually 26 miles, and they went down too late in the morning. And I'll come back to that. They went down at like 10 or 11 o'clock. And when you get down to the Tonto, they didn't go down to the Tonto Trail runs along the top of the river gorge. It's like 1,000 feet above the river. But I think they were there in the summer, the real summer. And literally it can be 110 degrees.
Yeah.
It's brutal.
So there is the dehydration problem as well.
Yes. And to wrap it up, I mean, she went on ahead. Um, you get crazed from dehydration. She tried to make her way down to the Colorado, and she got stuck on a dry stream bed at a cliff, like a waterfall, a dry waterfall. And that's where they found her, curled up, and she died. The the importance of that story is that if you run the Grand Canyon, you need to take appropriate safety precautions, including someone needs, especially if you're running it solo. If someone needs to know your plans, and Margaret Bradley and her friend, nobody knew their plans, so nobody knew to look for them. And then in terms of time of year, the best time is May or early June or September. So it's because the South Rim is 7,000 feet, so you get snow pretty late in the year. So you want to go after snow, but before you hit the mega heat of
Hmm.
the July and August. Um, and I went down early, which is another way to beat the heat. So you run at dawn, so say 5 a.m. So then you're down in the gorge, down at the river by say 7 a.m. and and it's literally in the 70s. Now by 1 or 2 o'clock, it's going to be 110.
Oh
But
wow.
yeah, but it's dry desert heat, so it gets really cool at night. So if you get down to the gorge and you run the gorge and you start coming back up um, early in the morning, then yeah, it'll hit 80 on the way up, but you're out of the gorge. And that's why if you run rim to rim to rim, which I didn't do, I ran down and then back up, so it was 17 miles. But there are people that run south rim to north rim and back to the south rim, and that's 20 plus miles. But it also necessitates going back down to the gorge when it's really hot,
Yeah.
like 105 or 110 degrees. But if you go, like I said, like middle of May to very early June, or September before the snow starts, and it can snow pretty in like October or even late September. That's the safest time to do it.
So you did this whole thing solo, and but you had like a support group that knew where you were, the itinerary and everything. That were, or you were just went on your own and let me try
Uh,
this.
just, just my family. My family, my wife knew, and I promised her I'd call her as soon as I got out of the canyon. But you just, as long as you have somebody that knows what you're doing, and but no, I carried water with me. Um, um, I carried a day pack with like 5 bottled waters because actually the Trans Canyon pipeline had broken like the day before or 2 days before. I have the exact information in the book. The Trans Canyon pipeline takes water from below the rim. There's a torrential spring that feeds water, and it was built in the 1970s, and it takes water all the way down and then all the way up to um, along Bright Angel Trail, up to the hotels and stuff at the top of the South Rim. So it's incredibly important. Unfortunately, it was built out of aluminum and it's pretty old and it suffers breaks. And that means that the reason to do the course I did, just to back it up, I took the South Kaibab, which is like a little east of the Grand Canyon Village and Visitor Center. It's a ridge trail. It goes along the ridge line all the way down. That's Cedar Ridge, Skeleton Point, the tip off. You go along the river and then you come up Bright Angel, and Bright Angel has water along it. So that's why it's important to come up that way from the Trans Canyon pipeline.
Hmm.
So there's a couple of rest places. There's Indian Garden, um, which I just saw an interesting item online because I talk about the Native Americans in the canyon, and it's going to be renamed. Um, I believe it's after the Havasupai. It's going to be Havasupai Garden. This literally just happened.
Oh,
They're going to have to change all the maps. But so you can get water though, so you can take water breaks on your way up. Um, but I knew there was a break in the pipeline. I didn't know if it was going to be fixed, so I made sure to take enough water um, that I could make it without getting any
and
interruption.
and throughout the your running, there was any moment of like deep reflection that you stop and you just contemplate things and you were super thankful that you were able to do that, or it was any stress moment that you were like, what am I doing here? So tell us a little bit more about those feelings as you went through this.
Yes, and I do get into that in the book. That happened on the ascent because my first cardiologist said that running, the one that told me not to run anymore, that I was a risk factor now for another heart attack or a stroke. And my wife was a registered nurse, so she knew all about that. Um, so yes, and I actually track that in the book because people of a certain age, I think over 60, certainly people I know, people look back on their lives, when you get older and you reflect. And especially when you're faced with potentially stroking out, because it was brutal coming up. And um, and in the end, I mean, spoiler alert, I remember my goal was 6 hours because a young blogger, like a guy in his 30s, had posted that he did it in under 6 hours. So I thought, okay, that'll be my goal. By the end, I decided I don't care if I break 6 hours. I just want to get out of here in one piece. I want to see my wife and
I
kids.
just want to finish.
I just want to finish. And plus, I was feeling really crappy. It was only after I got out that I realized I'd made the rookie mistake of my first marathon, which was I had all this water with me, but I only drank a little bit of it. And in distance running and marathons, the first rule of thumb is drink before you're thirsty.
Oh, I didn't
You
know
know,
that. What is the rationale behind that?
because otherwise you're playing catch up. So if you're
Mm.
taking water and you're running a marathon, you should be doing it not every mile, but starting at mile 5 or whatever. Take water regularly so that you don't get in deficient. You're not deficient in terms of hydration. Um, so I made that mistake one of the first time I ran the Grand Canyon, and I didn't have any power gels or anything with me. Um, so bottom line was I went back the next year and I ran it and broke 6 hours. But I had Gatorade with me, I had power
You
gels.
were more
Everyone,
prepared. You were more prepared.
yeah, I couldn't believe it when I got out of the canyon. I feel like I felt when I ran my first marathon. Oh my God. I made the same mistake that I made back then. So I felt like a bit of an idiot. Um, but then, like I said, I went back.
When you look back, why did you think you made that mistake? Because you were experienced, you've done many runs in the past. Were you anxious or nervous? What led you to that mistake, you think?
That's a good question. I don't know. I just spaced out or whatever. I mean, I couldn't believe I did it because it was such a rookie mistake. Um, And I don't drink a lot of water normally in runs. I hydrate after a run. I always have water with me, like for a long run, but I don't drink a lot of water, um, and I'm usually fine. But if you're doing something as strenuous as the Grand Canyon, because the elevation, actually the steepness of the incline coming up on Bright Angel is just it's like 30%. It's brutal. It's a very steep, especially the Devil's Corkscrew.
Were
Um,
you running at that point or walking?
I was running, but I knew I was going to have to power hike sections. Even elite runners, if you're doing the Grand Canyon, you can't run all the way from the river to the South Rim. There's portions where um, it's incredibly steep in a few places, but other places like Indian Garden, you run. So you just need to, and any ultra marathoner, that's the way they do it. The book has a good blurb from Dean Karnazes. He wrote a really big bestseller called Ultra Marathon Man, And he gets into all that where, the longer the distance, the more you kind of mix um, walking or hiking with running. There's a point where you need to do that. But he gave me a blurb that's on the cover. I was gripped and deeply moved by the story of human triumph. Dean Karnazes, ultramarathoner and New York Times bestselling author. And I didn't know him. I just reached out to him. And I'm a huge fan of his book, um, Ultramarathon Man. It's just, if anybody wants a motivational book for ultra running, it's very tongue in cheek. It opens with him on a run in Northern California, ordering pizza from whoever it was that would deliver to a street corner. Like he met them. He met the guy in the middle of the night. He's like eating pizza and he's running 100 miles or whatever.
But
Um,
Rick, the book, the idea about the book came before you start running or after? Or even before you start, you already have this project in mind that you want to do it?
no, it was after. I thought I was going to just write a short story, but then I decided to do the book, and I was inspired by Cheryl Strayed's Wild, which became a movie. That's the woman doing the solo hike on the Pacific Crest Trail, from like Southern California to Portland, Oregon.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a terrific book. I mean, I highly recommend it. Um, and I decided, no, I want to write a book, and I'll shop it after I finish it. You know, I'm not going to try to get a publisher ahead of time. So it's something I did in the last few years.
But the book is based on your first experience, your first run at the Grand Canyon, or based on the second one because you did it like almost like 1 year after the other, right?
Right. No, it recounts in detail the first time.
Oh, the
So
first time. So it's based on the first experience.
right. And the epilogue brings everything up to date, including the second time and some hikes I've done. Um, but it interweaves the geology of the Grand Canyon
Hmm.
because it's fascinating. Because and I actually took geology in college. I never thought it would be useful for anything. But when you run the Grand Canyon, when you start on the South Kaibab, you're running through 300 million year old Kaibab limestone, which originally was part of Pangaea, which was the last supercontinent.
Hmm.
And on your way down to the river gorge, they now identified four supercontinents. Pangaea is why, when you look at the map, why Africa and South America fit together. Because they were once together. So you're going through Pangaea, and then you're literally just doing this journey through geologic time down to the Vishnu schist in the river gorge, which is 1.6 billion years old. And that's four supercontinents ago. Columbia, which, like I said, was only recently figured out, and that was before there was life on land. A much smaller amount of land than there is today, but you're going through this all these layers and that journey through time, which is fascinating. Um, like Pangaea is where it was the age of the dinosaurs, but that's where the first mammals were. So to me, it's kind of like Atlantis
Yes,
because it's
fascinating.
really,
Yeah.
yeah, it was like the origin of humans because we're just, we're part of mammals.
Hmm.
So it's the first mammals, and then it split up, and the dinosaurs went off in different directions, and the mammals. Um, uh, it's a fascinating journey when because all this land on the way down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon should be buried deep in the earth, but here it's exposed all around you.
Do you think that the heart attack led you to the Grand Canyon, or you would do the Grand Canyon regardless of the heart attack? Because it feels like you really wanted to challenge yourself. I'm not sure if that was the motivation, but what do you think?
That's a good question. I had never thought about that. Um, I Well, the heart attack is certainly a factor because, like I said, there was a loss of certain amount of cardiac muscle and blood flow. So, what I really liked about it was a way to challenge yourself or challenge myself without trying to replicate something that a time that you achieved when you were 30 or
Right.
40 or whatever.
You were living a new experience. You were challenging yourself with something completely new. So that's is a huge motivation for you, right?
Yeah, and it was a way to challenge myself. Like I said, where I mean, I call it. There's a chapter called "A Race Without Mile Markers." I mean, because it was a race because I had a time goal, um, but it wasn't a race that I'd run before. So it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to run a marathon, and I'm older now and I have cardiac issues, so it's going to be, 30 minutes slower or whatever. So that was what was cool about it. Was like it was original, um, and it's just so iconic. I mean, the Grand Canyon is, just a um, gorgeous place, and something like 6 million people a year visit, but less than 10% go below the rim, and most of those only just hike a little way down. So it's not something that a lot of people do, um, but it's if you're smart about it.
Yeah, but before you reached into the conclusion that you were going to run the Grand Canyon, did you think about other places in US or even outside of US to run?
No, I mean I do some. There's a mountain in Northern California called Mount Tamalpais in Marin, just north of San Francisco, and I like to run Mount Tam. Um, and it's a standalone mountain, so it's really you're up when you're up there. It's wonderful views of San Francisco, the Pacific, the interior, um, and there are other canyons, or Bryce Canyon or whatever that could be. But the Grand Canyon is kind of the ultimate canyon,
Hmm.
in the world, really. So and it's the ultimate trail run, and it's actually really risky because I talk about it in the book. The the trail is held in place by what I call cross trail logs, and it's rutted in between them. So it's kind of like running down through like an obstacle course with tires, where you have to kind of bump 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 through the tires. It's kind of like that because you have to be really careful about tripping. And I was also on blood thinners, so if I tripped and hit my head on one of the cross trail logs and had internal bleeding, it's potentially fatal. So I had to be, and you don't want to fall off the trail in dangerous places. So it's challenging, but if you love trail running and a challenge, um, it's a potential thing to do.
Yeah,
At least
I'm
from
just
my point of
yeah,
view.
I'm just surprised that since you've been running for so long, you postponed that trip to the canyon to run for so many years, right? So that's why when I look at that, I say, well, probably the heart attack really motivated him to go to the next to this extra level.
Yeah, and it was just also just that my cousin had invited me to go on this hike, and I was with, there were like 15 of us, but they took a break on Cedar Ridge, which is maybe a mile and a half down on the South Kaibab. And I told him, if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to go on ahead. And I wound up kind of experimenting with running, further down, trying it out, like how would this work? Um, and I like the solitude. I used to always run with partners, when I was younger. But now I actually like it's a great time to think, go out and run trails on a gorgeous day or run the Grand Canyon. But I think it was just because my cousin had invited me that I was there and I was like, wow, this would just be an amazing place to run.
That's
And I did kind of regret that I didn't do it when I was younger. I certainly would have done it faster.
yes, and
There's back in your head, you're like, God, I wish I was doing this when I was like, in my 30s, and I'd be flying down the trail. But you have to work with what you have.
yes, and that's leads to my next question. What keeps you really motivated to keep running and challenge yourself? Is more because of the love of running and to stay healthy, or you are goal driven that you establish new goals every year that you want to accomplish?
Well, I love running most of the time anyway. Um, I think it's more about leading a life going forward,
Hmm.
including I haven't retired yet, quote unquote, retired from regular work
Yep.
yet. Um, and I'm just for me personally, it feels right to be doing new things and challenging yourself, um, rather than, like people always ask about my knees. Like any runner over 60, people ask them, well, what about your knees?
Yeah,
Don't you?
yeah. I was going to ask that question.
My knees are fine. The last time I had a knee injury was in college cross country. Um, but the point is though, it's about not using injury as an excuse maybe to stop. Um, because you can always recover from uh, I rarely get injured, but I had a groin pull a few years ago that actually made me stop for 3 days or whatever. Um, but it's more about like leading a life, moving forward, regardless of your age, and that's what works for me. Some people love being retired and going on cruises, um, but for me, it's more about getting out there and running, especially the Sunday long run. Um, 90% of the time, endorphins kick in. You just start feeling better, and you're so glad you did it, or I'm so glad I did it by the end of the run.
Yeah. And this is the only exercise that you primarily do, or do you also go to the gym, lift weights, or is basically run and that's it?
And I run and I do upper body stuff after I run, but just at the house, like
Hmm.
chin ups, push ups, and um, no, I don't go to the gym. Cardiac exercise is really the most important thing. So if you go to the gym, like a treadmill workout, but in terms of staying toned, then yeah, you can do weights aside from cardiac. Or I do, like I said, chin ups and pull ups work great for that, and push ups,
Hmm.
for me. So I just tie it into the end of my workout. After I run, I do some sit ups.
And you keep a diet pretty healthy all year long.
Yeah, I'm not for that fanatical, but yes, diets important. Though ironically, like I said, in my case, it wasn't a factor in the original heart attack. But yeah, like staying trim and healthy, and actually, if you run and do other exercise, you can get away with having some desserts and stuff. But don't eat fast food every day, and don't eat French fries every day.
Do you prioritize protein take? And I ask this question because as we get older, muscle start to atrophy, and protein is very important to stay on your body. Do you do any type of special macronutrient breakdown where you prioritize protein?
No, not really. I eat. I'm not a vegetarian, but I eat a lot less meat than I used to when I was younger.
Hmm.
Um, more inclined to pasta. And that traditionally was always um, something that distance runners took, like the day before a
Yeah,
marathon.
got a lot of carbohydrates.
Yeah, carbohydrates more than protein. Um, but I think it's a pretty balanced diet, and I haven't so far suffered like major, muscle. I mean, I think the exercise is what really keeps, if you're doing weights, or if you're doing pull-ups and chin-ups and push-ups, that works pretty well for me. That really is a good way, because that's your whole upper body,
Hmm.
and then the running takes care of your legs. I mean, you still can do calf raises, or I mean, I did some stuff with weights when I was a teenager, um, but I think most health professionals and cardiologists would stress that it's the cardio
Yep.
workout.
And,
Whether it's swimming, is also because a lot of people swim, and that has the advantage. If you do have knee issues, then swimming is great because you're not putting weight on your knees, and the same with cycling.
yeah, I
So
actually prefer cycling than running. Running to me is not. I'm not. I don't like running mainly because of my knees. I have arthritis and it's really painful. But cycling is good. I like it.
yeah, well, I grew up in Germany as a teenager, so I used to do a lot of cycling. Um, but these days, and I've tried it out a few times, but I think for me it's running, and um, but cycling is definitely, it's great. It's great exercise, and like you said, so many people um, do have knee injuries or knee issues when they get older, and it's a real pounding. Though trail running is better. Like I do, my runs are heavily trail runs because it's softer surface,
Okay.
so you're not on pavement. But still, cycling takes the weight off your body.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, I think, for people that people should really look at that as an option.
And what is next for you, Rick? Do you have any plans as far as running, any challenge for 2023 that you are planning to do?
Well, I hate to get all hippy dippy, but actually, after I did the Grand Canyon under 6 hours, it really, that's kind of like, in a way, that's like the old thing about you're kind of like overcoming nature.
Hmm.
And instead, I switched. I mean, I still run here, but in the canyon, like the last time I hiked down to the Tonto Trail, just right above the river gorge, and it was daybreak, and it was, you're in the Grand Canyon, the sun's coming up, but there's prickly cactus blooming. Um, it's gorgeous. So I've become, I think, more zen about it. I don't see ever running the Grand Canyon again. I'd prefer, and I hiked the Grandview Trail down to the Tonto. I'd prefer to hike it, take it slower, because hiking the Grand Canyon is still a real workout.
Hmm.
Coming back up is still very tough. But I'd rather appreciate and enjoy it than conquer it.
Interesting, interesting. And as far as book, do you have any other project? Because usually we never stop on the first one. I say that because I already published 28. And I thought that I was going to stop on the first one.
Well, congratulations. I'm going to have to Google your books. I had a novel I worked on for years on and off, and I used the pandemic as because I was working remotely to get that finally done and out. It's called Beat, and it takes place in San Francisco in the 1970s. It's kind of what happens after the counterculture, and
Interesting.
it's an interesting time because it's the beginning of punk and new wave music.
Hmm.
So I got that out, and that's out, and did a promotion behind that, and then it was okay. Got to finish the Grand Canyon book, um, and I'm working on something else that's nonfiction. So I think once you really commit to, well, frankly, there's a finite endpoint approaching. Not to be a downer,
Hmm.
it's kind of like at some point in your life, it's now or never.
Yep.
And and some people say, "Well, I'm going to retire and I'll write my novel." No, write your novel, while you're still working. See if you even can do it or want to do it. But at some point, yeah, it's part of achieving goals. If you have a bucket list, and mine included the novel, and actually, not to plug the novel too much, but it's actually in the Canyon book because the first time I was ever at the Grand Canyon was with my hippie girlfriend who inspired a character in the novel. Going cross country in a VW bus and camping out and even hiking a little bit of the Bright Angel Trail. We're talking like in the 1970s. But yes, I am working on another nonfiction book, and hopefully I'll be shopping that next year and see how that goes.
God, that's awesome, Rick.
The 28 books, Yuri. Tell me,
28.
like 20, yeah, 28
Yeah.
books. What kind of
Well,
books?
mostly, I would say 90% is around cybersecurity, information security, which
Oh,
is
wow.
my area of expertise. I did write one that is not technical, which is about my journey losing 100 pounds. It's called Ready, Set, Achieve. That talks about
And
going from morbidly obese to get back in shape. A lot of change in my mindset and how I approach things. So it was that was a good one.
that's fantastic. I'm gonna look that up after we finish. That
Thank
congratulations.
you,
That's
thank you.
that's huge. That's an obvious, huge personal journey, and maybe a reason you're doing this podcast and something that you can impart to
Yeah,
people.
because and that's why I cannot run because when I was obese, I developed early arthritis and really hurt my knees because of the amount of weight that I used to carry on for years. So after I lost weight, I still carrying the side effects of being obese for so long.
Wow.
So it's great that you don't have anything on your knees at the age of 65, and you still healthy and running, and you don't feel those things, you know. And I think that the key word here is consistency. You kept consistency over the years, and you condition yourself to be that way. That's really what makes a difference.
Yeah, because when I finally went back to running for good, we're pushing, what is it, 25 years? More than that, 22, 20, six, 20, almost 30 years of running and staying with it.
Yeah, that's consistency. So people don't realize that it's not the routine that you build just doing things once every month that will change your life. It's really being consistency day after day, year after year, you know, that will build your body and the capabilities that you have. So I'm not surprised that even after the heart attack, you were able to overcome everything and get this on your bucket list because you were in shape and you were already conditioned to do those things.
Right, but I think the rather than it's consistency, but I'd say the biggie is discipline. That that is all about getting your it's all about getting my butt out the door, including on days when I don't want to do it. That's the hardest thing to do is to motivate yourself and well and be consistent, like you were saying.
Yeah.
That it's just easy, and the older you get, the easier it is to make excuses. "Oh, I really don't want to do it today," but but the rewards come from that consistency and getting your butt. If I ever did a running blog, it would be called "It's All About Getting Your Butt Out the Door."
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And you brought a great point about discipline because people usually say, "How do you stay motivated?" I said, "Well, I do not. Motivation comes and goes. It's the discipline to do it when you don't want to do it."
Exactly. Exactly. That's perfect, Yuri. It's so true. Because yes, people assume, oh, you must be really motivated. No, it's about getting out and doing whatever it is: cycling, walking, hiking, running, swimming. Doing it on days when you're not really in the mood, because, like I said, 90% of the time, you will be glad you did, and you'll feel so much better once you start doing it, and certainly by the finish. And it has its own reward, and your body's in better shape. You know, you're healthier. You live a more, what's the right word? It's a higher quality of life.
Yes, and your overall performance, even at work, you have more mental clarity. Everything's changed. I remember even my performance at work when I was obese compared to after is different. I'm way more dynamic. I think faster. So everything's changed.
Mhm. Yeah, and your brain is getting all that oxygen from the blood circulating, and your whole body is. But yes, you're going to be sharper.
And that's why you probably don't have plans to retire, do you?
No, well, the TV job at some point, but I think that's why I think when people say that they want to write a novel, it's important or whatever book, start doing it. Start doing it while you're still working, because that's something you really want to do. Um, then that's a segue. That's something you can do later in life if it's like, wow, I really like this, and I want to continue that.
Yeah.
Rather than retiring and then it's like, oh my God, what do I do now? Oh, that novel. Boy, I don't know if I'm really.
Yeah, and there are so many people that postpone all their goals to after retire, and they end up not doing it because if you are going to wait until you are away from work to do things, it's like a waste of time. You're wasting your time not doing what you really want to do.
I totally agree. And I think travel is more rewarding the younger you are, actually, and you're more into it. So rather, like travel, like I said, I was lucky and fortunate. I grew up in Europe for 6 years. So we did tons of traveling. And it's incredibly educational, and it's great to do it when you're younger, and also in your 20s and 30s,
Hmm.
like, rather than take a cruise. when you're 70 or whatever. And
Yeah.
not that there's anything wrong with that,
Well, but the
but
stamina is not the same. Sometimes you want to, because for example, I'm reaching 50, and one of the things that I love is routine. I love my routine. I love know exactly what time I'm going to the gym and what time I'm going to do things. And when I'm traveling, I have to fully readapt my routine,
yes.
and sometimes it's not as fun as used to be. So for someone that is very routine based like me, it's traveling is good to decompress, but at the same time, it disturbs a little bit of the routine, which is important to me.
I totally relate to that. But when I travel, and then I'm glad I did because it's good to unstick yourself from your routine. Um, it kind of changes your perspective, especially if you
Yes.
go to another country. It's like, wow, okay, it was so hard to get my butt in gear and go on this trip, but wow, I'm really glad I did it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you feel this, but after you go, mainly internationally, and you come back, you have way more sense of gratitude, and you start appreciating more your routine. It's like a boot, right? You are refreshing all your sense of
Mhm.
your daily life.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, absolutely.
Rick, this was an amazing conversation. Congratulations for this journey. Congratulations for the book. 6 hours running for my life in the Grand Canyon. Uh, I'm really looking forward to see more coming from you as far as books, and keep it up. Very inspiring story. Keep running and doing the things that you love.
Well, thanks, Yuri. It's been a real pleasure. And I'm going to look for that book of yours,
I
the weight
appreciate.
loss one.
I appreciate. Thank you very much. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining today's episode. This is gonna be the last episode of the year, episode 65. So I appreciate everyone that subscribed. We have a lot more coming next year.